having a good day. I'm Vinod Karpat, like Deepthi mentioned. I am a product manager at Azure. I work on Form Recognizer, and today I would like to walk you through a few different capabilities that are relatively new in Form Recognizer, and show you how you might use Form Recognizer for your document processing workflows. If you're unfamiliar with Form Recognizer is intended to help you extract information from documents. Now, these documents can be in a variety of different scenarios, right? So you might have documents from healthcare, banking, retail, customer support, tax, insurance. There's a variety of different scenarios that you might want to extract and process information from documents, as well as there's a variety of ways in which you want to process this information. You might have some process automation workflows, for example, expense processing. You might have some invoices that are coming in. You want to automate the invoice processing. You might have knowledge mining scenarios. For example, you might have some clinical trials. For example, you might want to extract some information about these clinical trials and try to figure out what's happening within each of these trials and how effective certain drugs are and things like that. Or you might have an industry-specific application, like maybe a loan processing application, where a customer uploads a set of documents that need to be processed. And each of those scenarios, there's things that you can work with Form Recognizer and the different tools within Form Recognizer to construct a solution that works for your particular use case or particular scenario. So what is Form Recognizer? I want to take a minute or two just to sort of get everybody on the same page in terms of what Form Recognizer capabilities are before we dive into some of the newer capabilities like document classification and things like that you obviously are here to learn about. If you think about Form Recognizer, we have four main classes of APIs, right? At the very root is the document extraction or read API, which is essentially content extraction. So it extracts content as well as detects languages. The next is document or the general document APIs, right? And when you think about general document APIs, these models work on any particular document you send us, right? So as long as it's a format that we support, we will try our best to extract the fields that we can extract from these documents. And these models, for example, the layout extracts all the things that read does. In addition to that, it extracts structure. So when you think about structure, you think about things like table extraction, things about paragraphs, think about paragraphs as assigning roles to paragraphs, and things like that. So if you think about the core value of what layout does for you, it allows you to decompose a document into granular parts, and then you can use that for downstream analysis tasks, right? So for example, you want to extract out a particular section of a document. That's possible now with the layout API that can give you that section header as well as the section body for each of those components of the document that you want to process. We'll talk a little bit more about layout in terms of tables and selection marks and things like that, but I just wanted to make you aware that those capabilities exist. The next API is the general document API, and the general document API is key value pairs in addition to everything that layout does, right? So if you think about a typical form, you don't need to create a model for that particular form. As long as it has key value pairs contained within it, we will extract those key value pairs with no training required. So it's just an unsupervised model that can extract these key value pairs from any document. The next model we'll talk about is the pre-built models, right? And the pre-built models, I think about these as document type specific models. So you might have an invoice, you might have a W-2, you might have a contract. Those are all really specific document types. And since you know what those document types are, you can be opinionated about what you want to extract from them. So you might say, for an invoice, I need all the line items, plus I want these things like the shipper's name, billing address, and things like that. So each of these pre-built models has a very defined schema and works on the specific document type. Finally, you have custom models, right? So if none of these things actually work for you, you might have a really custom document type where you want a specific set of fields extracted that the general document model does not extract. You can go train your own model. And I'll give you a quick demo of how you could do this in the Form Recognizer Studio as well. So with models or with custom models, you have the option to label a few samples and then train a model that can then work on your documents as they come in to extract the fields that you care about. So you get to define both the document type as well as the fields extracted. So with that, since we've talked a little bit about like what Form Recognizer is, I also wanted to share a quick update with you in terms of like how Form Recognizer works. So you start with your documents. And everything is just a really simple REST API call. So make a REST API call that is either through the REST API directly or through one of our language-specific SDKs. That essentially goes to the model. It submits your document to the model for analysis, and you get back an operation location. This operation location is essentially what you poll for to look for updates. And when your document is completed processing, you get a response back that includes the JSON result from the particular model that you use to analyze your document. At this point, we typically delete all of the results from your document as well as the analysis within 24 hours of when your request is submitted. There are a few different variety of document types that you can use. Here's a list of the different document types as well as the file sizes that you can use. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about what's new in our latest public preview, right? The title of this presentation was about document classification, and document classification and splitting is one of the new capabilities within Form Recognizer. I'll give you a quick demo of how you can use that in a minute, and show some of the use cases that you might want to think about how you could use this, right? The other new capabilities are adding to the general document model. We've added a new capability for zero-shot extraction within general document model that uses the OpenAI technology. But what it does is allows you to provide a hint in terms of fields that you might want to extract that may not be extracted by the model itself. And that's another thing that I'll show you a quick demo on as well. There's things like common names. Common names, think about this as you have a common challenge where you might have different vendors providing you different documents. Those are all the same type, but each of them has maybe a unique name that they use for a particular field, like social security number, for example. Vendor A might call it social security number, vendor B might call it SSN, and so forth. So you might have different variations of the same key, and the common name allows you to map against all of those by providing a single key that we would recommend as the common name for each of those fields. In addition to that, there's a number of different updates across the platform, right? So if you're familiar with Form Recognizer, you know that the READ API extracts content and language detection. It now includes barcodes, so you can now extract barcodes from documents as well. And layout also includes annotations, formulas, as well as font styles. So if you're, a lot of you are working in data science, a lot of you read these scientific papers, there's a lot of formulas in there, there's a lot of mathematical expressions in these documents. Those are all extractable now using the formulas capability within layout. Pre-built models, we've added a new pre-built model for the 1098 model. So it's tax season in the US. We're getting up there with April deadline looming. The new 1098 pre-built models have a few different variants. They allow you to extract the 1098 for mortgage insurance, as well as models that include 1098 variants for student loan as well as tuition. There's also updates to some of the other pre-built models, like receipt. There's language expansion across a number of different areas of the product, both pre-builts as well as custom. So custom neural models have now expanded to support German, Italian, Dutch, French, and Spanish, as well as we've added support for high-resolution documents across the read and layout APIs. So that those two APIs now support high-resolution documents for you to process your documents if they come in as high resolution fields. Like typically engineering drawings and things like that are sort of document types that require this capability. So let's talk a little bit about the Form Recognizer custom model capabilities. Until today, you had only document extraction models, but now we've added the ability to create a document classification model as well. Extraction models typically work on the document types that you define, as well as extract the fields that you define. With custom classification models, you're now adding the ability to train a explicit classifier. And I'll give you a quick demo of what the document classification model looks like in a second here. But some of the core challenges that you might think about that customers run into with document classification is you might have for example, you might have a customer of yours uploading a set of documents where you don't really know which document they're uploading because you've asked them to upload like maybe 10 documents. Or the other common challenge is they scan all these documents together, create a single PDF, and upload that single PDF for you. Those are all scenarios that the document classification model is intended to solve. So let's take a look at like how you might want to train a document classification model. And I'm going to pop over to the Form Recognizer Studio in order to do this. So if you're not familiar with the Form Recognizer Studio, this is your one-stop shop for how you sort of experience all of the goodness of Form Recognizer. So in the latest update to the studio, you'll see that there's a number of different new additions to the studio, some things with general document models and query fields. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but let's start with the custom section here. And in the custom section, there's a new title now for classification models. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new classification model. I'll create a new project, and I'll just call this the ODSC project. At this point, all I'm trying to do is select my particular form recognizer resource, as well as the data set that I want to work with. A couple of points to note here is the preview is available only in 3 regions. It's in West US 3, West US 2, East US, as well as West Europe. So as long as you have a resource that is in one of those regions, you should be able to use the preview APIs to validate if these work for your particular scenario. So in this case, I've selected my form recognizer resource, and now I'm going to select where my data set is located. And in this case, it's in a folder called demo. So when I hit continue and create my project, the first thing you'll notice is if your documents are organized by folders, right? Preserve those folders as you use them in the studio, because the studio will recognize that your document has folders, and it says, okay, these are the folder names you have. Do you want to continue to use them, right? And in this case, I'm just going to say yes. Use the folder names, and all my documents are now labeled with just one click of a button, right? So I can obviously also go ahead and alter these labels if I wanted to. But this is a really convenient way for you to train a classifier with just a couple of clicks of the mouse. So at this point, I have a few different document types in here. So you can see I have some contracts, I have some POs, I have some SOWs, and I have some trade confirmations. So those might be things that I expect to see come through in scenarios that I'm using this particular classifier for. So to train this classifier, all I need to do is hit the train button. I'm going to call this my ODSC classifier. And I hit train. So at this point, I go look at my models, and you'll see that I have a few different models that I've already trained here, right? So my ODSC model is going to start running, and it's going to go through the training process. This training process typically takes like a minute or two, right? It depends on the size of your data set and a few other things, but it takes about a minute or two to run. So what I did do is I've already trained another classifier so the ODSC one actually completed. So let's go ahead and test with that, right? So in order to test, right, the couple of core things that I call out is let's maybe start with a particular document. We'll take this, right? And in this particular document, you'll see that it is 6 pages long. I've got about 4 pages of an SOW in here. I've got a purchase order, and I've got a trade confirmation. So when I click on analyze on this particular document, this document is now submitted for analysis, and the output of this is essentially going to tell me what each of the different document types are that are composed within this particular document, as well as what those page ranges are. So in this case, it's predicting that I have an SOW on pages 1, 2, 3, and 4. I have a PO on page 5 and a trade confirmation on page 6, which is exactly what we just looked at. So now you can take this exact same information and go ahead and use this with a custom model, right? And I'll give you a quick demo of what that looks like in a minute when we talk about custom models as well. So with the classification model, you now have complete control about how you want to use your documents and how you want to route those documents. We did have a model compose, or we still do have a model compose capability that continues to be available for you to use if you're trying to use composed models. What you're trying to do essentially is put together a few different models into a single model, and letting the composed model decide which of those underlying component models it wants to use when a new document is submitted for analysis. And there's a few differences in terms of like how classification works versus compose. We can talk about that in a little bit more detail. If you have any questions, feel free to post that in the chat. I can definitely respond to that. If that's an interest, we can spend some time talking about that towards the end of this presentation. So with that, I'll pop back over to my slides. So we looked at document classification, right? So I wanted to continue sort of on the vein of showing you what all the different capabilities are within Form Recognizer, and then sort of dive deeper into the parts that have newer updated components within it, right? So if you think about the common scenarios within Form Recognizer, it is obviously using read, layout, pre-built models, or custom models. But you can choose how you want to construct these workflows within your environment to deal with the specific document types, as well as the specific challenges you're working with. So let's take a look at some of the updates within read, layout, and general document that sort of align with some of these challenges that you're talking about, right? In terms of layout, read and layout, for example, layout extracts tables and selection marks, and we'll take a look at this in a little bit more detail here in a second. We also know that I also shared with you that layout now extracts, in addition to layout, it also extracts barcodes. So let's take a look at like some of those capabilities in the studio itself, right? So let's go look at what those experiences might look like. So I'm going to pop over to the Form Recognizer Studio. Again, I've got my my resource configured. In this particular case, I'm going to add a new document type, and just add a new document to test with, because this is going to be something that we want to look at. So I'm going to pick a sample invoice. I run this through analysis, and you'll see that in addition to extracting all of the different fields, as well, I mean, in addition to extracting the tables, like it recognizes that there's a table here with all this information, and it just extracts this values. In addition to that, it's also recognizing that there's a barcode here, right? And if I go look at the barcodes, it's telling me that there's two types of barcodes that it's detected here. There's a code 39 as well. There's two code 39 types of barcodes. And so there are a few different variations of barcodes that we recognize, for example, QR codes, code 39 barcodes, and a few others. There's a lot more information about this in the documentation if you wanted to look at that to determine if the specific barcode type you're interested in is recognized. The other updates that I'll share with you is with the there's a couple of different updates I wanted to share with you, specifically with the general document model, right? And this is one of the things that we're working with as starting to show up in the general document model, but will eventually extend to a number of other models as well. And this is essentially the integration with OpenAI, right? So with the general document model, for example, it'll analyze any particular document and extract key value pairs. But it also has now this ability for you to add query fields. The one thing that I'll call out is the query fields feature is only available in East US. So your resource has to be in East US for you to be able to use this query fields feature. So in this case, there may be a few things that I might want to extract from this document, right? Like for example, if I zoom in a little bit here, you'll see that there's this notes due in 2028, right? So if I want to maybe look at what is the notes due in 2028, as well as if I want to maybe look at like outstanding shares, right? So I could add a query field to extract those specific values. So if I say % notes due 2028 is one field, and another field that I want to use is outstanding right? So these are the two fields that I want to extract, and I click analyze now. So in addition to the typical analysis result that I get from a general document model, which would be things like the key value pairs, output of layout, all of those goodness, I now have two additional fields that will be available for me to use, and that's going to be the two fields that I just defined for notes outstanding in 2028, as well as the outstanding shares. So you can see in this particular case, the query fields returned notes outstanding shares is this humongous number, and the percentage due is percentage of notes due in 2028 is 3.125%, which is essentially this number down here. These were not fields that were extracted as key value pairs. The key value pairs that we extracted were really specific to things that showed up as key value pairs. But this is an example of how you might want to say there's certain things I need from this document that are not extracted as key value pairs. How do I use that without actually having to go to the extent of training a model? So this is a simple zero-shot way of you defining what those fields are, giving the model a hint, and using those hints to then extract the right fields and the right values that you care about. So I'll pop back over to the presentation. So in terms of obviously, in terms of updates to read and layout, we looked at like barcodes. I haven't really shown you annotations, formulas, and fonts, but those are also available to use. In the interest of time, I'll skip through some of these. We looked at some of the updates to barcodes. For example, there's a QR code here that's being recognized, and as well as a annotation here. So in this particular example, I have a little X mark as for the unit price, and it's recognizing that as an annotation. So that's an example of how you can use some of these capabilities as you extract all this information from your documents. The other updates to the general document model, for example, include things like the adding a common name, right? So when you think about common name, again, the challenges are you've got a document that has different variations. In this case, it's a job application form. Each you might have different variations based on years, different variations based on customers you're working with. How do you extract the right values, and how do you ensure that they all map to the schema that you want to map them to? And that's essentially what the common name feature allows you to do. It allows you to map these different fields extracted using the common name to a general taxonomy or a general name that you might want to map to. So it reduces the dimensionality of the problem from being a many to one relationship to a one-to-one relationship. So let's look at the output from. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, we have a related question. I would like to bring it into your notice by Sam. Can it extract text under headers and map it to the header?
Can it extract text? Sorry, repeat the question. Can it extract text under headers and?
Can it extract text under headers and map it to the header?
Map it to the header, right? Okay, right. So sorry, I had a hard time hearing you, but I think I understood the question. So let's take a look at this, right? So in this particular example, right? So I'm analyzing this particular document, and you'll notice that there's some headers as well as text, right? So if you look at the result itself, you'll see that we're organizing everything by paragraphs as an example, and it's going to tell you what each of these paragraphs are and what So you have bounding information about what comes before the other, as well as you have information that you can do in read order, right? So in this case, you've got a paragraph that says this is a role, it's a section header, and the content is the scoop of the day. And then there's all of these paragraphs underneath it that are available until you get to the next paragraph that has a section header title. So you can absolutely, loop through the API, find a section header, then keep collecting paragraphs until you hit the next section header, and that's the way you sort of like build out your document or build out your document tree if you think about it as section headers with section bodies. Does that answer the question? Yeah, if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and DT, if you don't mind, just keep an eye on those and let me know if there's any follow-ups. All right, so I'm going to head back over to the slides again. So we talked a little bit about the general document model. We talked about the common names feature. Let's take a look at some of the updates to pre-builds, right? In terms of pre-builds, I think that the one update that I'll really focus on is the 1098 model, because the 1098 model is brand new in this particular update. If you notice that there's a 1098 model, but there's also a few different variants of the same 1098 model. So I can go ahead and analyze this particular document. And when I analyze this document, you'll see that I get back all of the fields that are extracted from the model itself. That'll include the names, the social security number, the address, and the mortgage interest amount, and things like that. So those are all capabilities that are sort of available within the model itself. For some reason, this is taking forever, but let's maybe pause and head back over to the slides and see what we can do with some of the other models. So in terms of people, so go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. In the meantime, we have a follow-up question. Also, yeah. When will it be available in Canada region by Sam?
That's a good question, Sam. So one of the things that we're trying to do right now is trying to limit our regional availability in terms of previews, because previews are essentially intended for you to try out the service, validate that it works. And if it doesn't, then you obviously can share some feedback with us. But if it does, that's great. Then that's also feedback that we want to hear. And then when it's generally available, that's when it's going to be available in all regions. We expect that that's going to be sometime towards the middle of the year, maybe the June, July timeframe is probably what we're looking at for that. So Canada Central is probably in that, or Canada. I'm not sure which Canada region you were talking about, but that's probably in that timeframe, the middle of the year sort of timeframe. Okay. In terms of so let's take a look at some of the other. In terms of pre-builds, again, like I said, like there's a few different models that you can use. Invoices has been a really popular model that a lot of customers use for their invoice processing workflows. You extract the document. It's the simple sort of model that we just talked about, where you send in the document, it extracts all the fields that you're interested in and produces a response. In addition to the invoice, we also include the key value pairs. So if there's specific fields that you might be looking for that may not necessarily be part of the invoice schema, but are still extracted by the key value paired model, that is also included as part of the invoice response. So you can continue to use both as a combination in terms of ensuring that it completes the scenario that you're interested in. The receipt model has some updates as well. We now support thermal receipts as well as additional languages that the receipt model is available in. So go ahead and try that out. And each of these things is available for you to use either with the SDK or with the REST APIs directly. I will call out though that the SDK for the latest release is not quite out yet. So if you want to use the generally available release, there's obviously an SDK available for that. But for the preview release, we expect the SDK to be available sometime in April. With that, let's pop over and look at custom models again. We did a quick demo looking at custom models in terms of classification models. Let's focus now on the extraction aspect of custom models. So if you think about extraction, there's a couple of additional steps that you need to do to train a custom model as you go through this process, right? It's a very similar process to how you create your project in terms of identifying a resource, identifying a data set, but then there's an additional step as you go through the labeling experience. So when you go ahead and label your documents, you add some labels to your documents, and that allows you to then train a model to extract the specific fields that you're looking for. So let's take a look at what that experience might look like, and we'll pop back over to the studio, and then we'll go into a custom model again, right? In this case, I'm going to pick the custom extraction model. And I'll pick this particular project because it's already been created and it sort of deals with some of these documents that we've already looked at. The SOW is an example here, right? What I'll do is I'll go ahead and add a new document just to show you what the labeling process might look like in terms of these SOWs. And I need to find my SOW, right? So that'll be in here. I'll just pick a random one down here, maybe, right? So this should be a new one that gets added. It takes a second for it to run layout on this particular document, but now as soon as it runs layout, it's going to be available for us to label, right? So in this particular case, if you look at it, look at a different document, you'll see that I've got a few different fields labeled. I've got the title, I've got the date, I've got the service performed by, I've got the period, and I've got a table for the fee schedule, right? So that's the other thing that we have. So let's go ahead and label this particular document. My goal is to do this within the next minute or two, right? So to label this particular field, I'm going to go ahead and select that, and that's my title. This is my date that I want to use. This is Contoso Electronics that I'm using as my service performed by, and my dates are these dates, which is essentially period commencement date as well as period end date, right? So those are the few values that I needed. In terms of tables, I can go ahead and label this particular table. There's this new auto label feature. That's really cool. So I go ahead and hit auto label. I pick an existing field that I want to use rather than create a new one. And in this case, I'm saying, all right, so it's identifying it's just telling me how I want to label this particular document. I hit continue, and then I'm going to skip through this a little bit. It also labels the header row if I want to, but in this case, I really don't want to, so I'm going to deselect that, hit continue, and this is essentially what I want to use for the labels for this particular table, right? And so at this point, I've labeled all my documents. The rest of the documents are pre-labeled. In this case, I've just added a new document, labeled that, and I go ahead and hit train, right? And I can call this my ODSC extraction, or I call it my ODSC SOW, right? And now I need to select a particular build mode, right? So in this case, I can select neural or template. General recommendation is that you use neural. Neurals are going to be a better model for most cases, but there are certain cases in which you want to use template, and those are typically revolving around documents in specific languages that neural doesn't support, or you might have a scenario where you might want to extract a signature, right? And when I say extract, we only detect the presence of signatures. We don't extract signatures. So if you want to detect the presence of a signature, that might be another reason why you might want to train a template model. But template models have some serious limitations about, like, having them be the exact same visual template. And if they're not, then those models need to be sort of trained on each template. And then you can compose those different models together into a single model that sort of spans across all the different template variations you're dealing with. So I've gone ahead and trained that model. You can see it's not started, or it'll start anytime now, which is it has, but it takes about 20 to 30 minutes to train, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to our demo, right, which we looked at with the classification model, and I'm going to pick that exact same file that we wanted to test with, right. So I'm going to test this model, but I'm going to test it with that exact same file that we used in the samples to test with our classification model. We know that our SOW was in pages 1, 2, 3, and 4 from the fact that our classification model predicted that. So in this case, I'm just going to use that information that it gave us, and I'm going to say this is essentially, I want to use this for pages 1 through 4, right? And all this is automatable through the API. I'm just doing this through the studio to give you a quick demo of how this works. So once I go ahead and click analyze, now this entire document is going to get submitted, but only the first 4 pages of that document are going to get analyzed. And so as you think about like pricing, for example, form recognizer pricing is based by number of pages analyzed. So you might send us a 20-page document, but you might say only analyze the first page, in which case you're still getting billed only for 1 page. It's not going to be billing you for 20 pages. So here's an example of how I used that particular document that contained the SOW as well as a few additional documents, sent in only the first 4, or sent in the entire document, but analyzed only the first 4 pages, and the model extracted all the fields that I needed from it, right? So if you go look at like each of the fields is highlighted, the model extracted, as well as the fact that here's a table on page 2 of 6 that it found the fee scheduled in. So here's a really great example of how you could take the classification model and pair that with the extraction model to then process your documents, right? And this gives you the complete flexibility that you need in terms of like defining your solution. Like you might want to say, oh, if it's a particular document type, I can skip that's possible now. Or you might say, if there's a particular document type that I don't see, I start collecting enough samples of that, and now I can go train a custom extraction model to start processing that particular document type. So those are all scenarios that you can now light up using all these capabilities as sort of building blocks as you piece together your solution. So I'm going to head back over to the slides, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the choices as you think about the different model types that you want to use, right? So the key differences between a document type that is a neural model or a template model is the fact that a neural model uses both layout as well as language features, but the template models tend to focus more on the layout features, right? So if you think about document types, for example, invoices, where 2 different invoices from 2 different vendors looks very different, a template model will struggle when you train a single model across all those different invoices, because it is learning features about those templates that are unique to the trained data set it's learned from. And whereas the neural model can somewhat learn across these different templates, but it still has some limitations in terms of like how many different variations you can add into a single template, into a single neural model. But in general, I'd say if you have the choice of looking at these 2 options and choosing one, you should choose the neural model, because that's probably going to produce a higher quality model as you train a model for your extraction needs. In terms of how you want to use Form Recognizer, obviously if you're an Azure developer, you can do this in any different way. But if you're not an Azure developer and you're comfortable with like low-code, no-code solutions, the AI Builder solution on the Power Platform is a great place to start. You can go ahead and use that, and that allows you to use all the Form Recognizer capabilities with an AI Builder to then extract data from documents and forms. Within Azure, obviously there's simple ways to get started. Logic Apps is a great way for you to just build a simple document processing workflow. You can do some things in knowledge mining with cognitive search, where you can do some skills, and you can create a Form Recognizer skill to enrich your documents as they're brought into the search index, and then use that to enrich your sort of knowledge mining experience with both the structure as well as the fields that you extract. And you can always use it through anything else that you want to do, right? So there's a lot of customers that are running it in containers, both on premises and as well as AKS, as well as customers that run it in their data and analytics scenarios. Like one of the reasons I put Synapse in here is because you are a data science audience, and you might want to use Form Recognizer as a way to featureize your documents before they're used in your downstream sort of model building or data analysis needs, right? So extracting some of these things from documents, taking these components that you extract, whether it be section headers and sections of documents, whether it be tables, you can take all these capabilities, sort of align them around a specific use case, and then use that to then build your models or improve your model as you get more data coming in through the process. So those are just examples of how you can use Form Recognizer. Again, I started today with talking a little bit about the different modes of classification. I wanted to maybe spend a minute talking a little bit about how the new classification feature compares to the model compose capability that exists today with custom models. So if you think about custom models today, you have a model compose, which you can send in a specific document, and that model compose will then pick the right extraction model to route that particular document to in order to analyze the fields from it, right? And this works great for most scenarios. If you have a simple document where you don't know the type, but you just want, you know it's one of these 4 or 5 types, you want to analyze it, this is great. It does have some limits though, right? Some of the limits are, for example, if you might want to ignore a specific document type, right? So you might say, I get 1 of 7 document types, but I only want to analyze 3 of those document types. That's something that Form Recognizer does not support with Model Compose, because Model Compose will always try to invoke the model that it thinks is the best qualified to do the job. So it is essentially an implicit flow. You don't get to decide if it should go through the output of classification should feed into the input for extraction. But with the classification API, you now split this up, and it's more of an explicit process. So you get the output of the classification. You get to decide whether you want to route that now into an extraction model or not, and you get to pick which extraction model you want to use based on the classification result that you came back with. The downside of this is it's a 2-step process now, right? So the downside is that that you still need to make 2 API calls, 1 to the classification and 1 to the extraction. We are working on sort of things of how we might want to improve this in the future, but we don't really have a clear opinion to share yet in terms of what that might look like. In terms of other benefits, you might want to think about the scenario that we mentioned where you have a single file that contains multiple logical documents. That's another one that's supported now. With a classification model, you can essentially chunk up the single file into multiple documents and use each of those chunks as an analysis request, as an input to an extraction model. With Model Compose, that was a challenge because the Model Compose will only act on the first document, right? Another common challenge is like you might get a batch of invoices, right? So you might get 5 invoices that are scanned together, and that's also a challenge with Model Compose because it'll only analyze the first invoice in the set. But now you can use the classification model. One of the benefits is that it'll actually tell you that there's 5 logical invoices within, or 5 documents within this single file, and you can use that information to then extract the fields that you need from each of those individual documents, versus having to rely on only the first output to process these files as you go along. So those are some of the benefits as you think about like why you might want to use classification versus Model Compose. And these are sort of some of the deeper nuances that you might get into as you get into Form Recognizer. And there's a lot of information about this in the documentation. So the recent update to the documentation has a number of different updates that include some of these challenges about why you might want to pick one versus the other, as well as what the pros and cons of each of those choices that you make. So with that, I'm going to pause and turn it back over to Deepti and see if there's any questions that we want to take, because I've sort of reached the conclusion of some of the content that I wanted to share. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to try to answer.